Hello, I'm your host, Skeptical Scott.
And I'm this week's co-host, Artie Fisher.
It's funny you say that. The Heathen. There and back again. Today, we have an interview with lifelong learner Lee, one of the first people I got to meet at the American Atheist Conference this past spring. Listeners, I think of the title of his website, that's going to tell you everything. It's a formerbelieverreads.com. Hey, perhaps we should call him Literacy Lee, and you'll see that we have some things in common. Please welcome to the show, Lee from the state of Minnesota. How you doing, Lee?
Hey, I'm doing well. Thank you, Skeptical Scott, for having me.
Oh, you bet. Hey, what's good for you right now as we're recording?
I think I can tell you I'm a teacher in Minnesota, and we're finishing a school year here. We're going to see some graduates leaving the school, and that's always happy, but kind of a little bit sad. Anyway, we're wrapping up the school year and looking forward to summer.
Well, I am so glad we are able to squeeze this recording in before graduation, because I know that is tonight.
Yep.
Thanks for making that happen. You know, when we think about where you and I met, what's one highlight for you from the Atheist Conference in Minneapolis?
Well, that was my first Atheist Conference, and so I thought, well, I live in Minnesota, I should probably go. And I'm so glad I went. You were one of the first people I met, but I met a whole lot of other people that have similar views, and the vibe was so positive. There were even Christians there that came in to do an atheist Christian debate. That was a highlight, I thought. And then listening to various speakers or podcast leaders that I've listened to, and YouTube channel leaders that I've listened to over the years, and meeting them. So I had a very positive experience there. It was great.
All right, here's what we have in common, okay? We're both teachers.
Yeah.
We were both at our first Atheist Conference.
Mm-hmm.
And when we met the speakers, at least this was my experience, I felt like they were very down to earth. And so I was starstruck for maybe a second, but then it was more just people talking. And I love that.
I had a similar experience. Also, I got to put a little plug in for the drag show. I don't know if you went to the drag show.
I did not go to the drag show.
There was a drag show.
I was playing euchre at the time.
Oh, well, it was an over the top drag show that was really, really fun. And I really appreciate it, because a lot of the speakers during the day were often talking about queer issues and persecution that the queer community goes through and is going through now. So it was nice to have the drag show as kind of a culmination of the Saturday. And it was just having a lot of fun.
So, yeah, it wasn't just all seriousness. It was also, hey, we get to hang out and party.
Yeah.
So, hey, a formerbelieverreads.com. A former believer of what?
I grew up evangelical / mainstream Presbyterian in North Carolina. Mm-hmm. And I loved the Bible as a kid. First book, a lot of people listening here probably have the same experience. First book I read it at my mom and dad's knee. I have memories of my mom reading the children's, illustrated Bible with a lot of
pictures, right?
I know, right? Well, especially of hell and demons and stuff like that.
Oh no!
But yeah, and I read the Bible. I grew up reading, and I went to Sunday school. I went to a Christian school from first grade through 12th grade. And I always gave the right answers to the Bible study questions. And so you get positive reinforcement when you give the right answers,
Yeah.
And then I went to Wheaton College in Illinois, which a lot of your listeners will know. It's an interdenominational evangelical focused school, but it has a high academic reputation, which I found to be true. I studied literature and philosophy and got my undergraduate degree in that. My best teachers in high school and in college told me basically this. They said, ask the toughest questions you can, because God can handle them.
Yeah. Well, certainly should be able to. Yeah. Yeah.
I know. Right. And so I'm going through college and I'm thinking, well, I'm going to be a teacher of some sort. I'm either going to be a high school teacher or a college teacher. And so I entered Wheaton thinking I'll be a high school teacher. And then halfway through, I went, no, I want to be a professor and be an apologist for the Christian faith. And so I got a degree in literature and philosophy. And then I went to seminary at Luther Seminary in Minnesota, and got a Master of Arts in systematic theology.
How about that? Wow.
And I also got a degree in teaching. I got a master's in teaching. And as I'm going through seminary, I'm realizing, I want to be an apologist of sorts, but I'm realizing that wait a minute, a lot of theology is about letting God off the hook.
Mm-hmm.
It's about excusing God's behavior in the Bible. And I realized that no other parent, if they acted this way, the way God does as a loving parent, supposedly especially in the Old Testament, but even in the New Testament, that we would put that parent away and we'd lock him up and wouldn't let him out. and so
CPS would be called. Yeah.
Yeah. And yeah, exactly. And I went through a phase where I was moving from more conservative Christianity through progressive Christianity, which I think a lot of scholars do, and a lot of people probably listening to your podcast do, where
sure.
You become a little more, you don't accept the text, literally. You don't, you can read metaphorically into the text, but I still believed, I was an agnostic Christian for, rewind about 15, 20 years. And as an agnostic Christian, I thought, well, Christianity is not the only way, but it's the way I know. So I can be agnostic about it. And then I just realized I'm doing a lot of defending this God that, if you and I were made God for a day, we could do a better job. And I'm defending this God, and I realized that, and so I don't know, it's maybe within the past 10 years, and I went, I'm really an atheist. I'm an agnostic when it comes to how I believe I receive knowledge, because I don't know everything. But in terms of the religions that I've studied, especially the Christian religion, I've studied to try to get to know, I'm an atheist because I just don't believe that any religion has the truth with a capital T in it.
I appreciate that, because I think it's pretty rare, at least I think it's rare, with the discussions I've had with people, that it's not ever really one time or one spot. I mean, maybe you and I remember the moment we finally said, I think I'm just going to let this go, but it just takes a while. It takes a while,
Yeah. My son, he and my daughter graduated college right when COVID hit, and they both came home. And my son, he graduated college, and he said to me, "Dad, I'm interested in understanding the Bible more. And there's a friend of mine from college who graduated with me. We want to do an online, a Zoom conversations about the Bible." And he just said, "Where do I start?" And I said, "You know what? I'll read it with you." At that point, I had been through seminary, and I had read so much of the Bible over and over again, the key passages, right, and even the obscure passage. I read a lot of it. And I even studied Greek and Hebrew to understand the issues of translation, even though I can't read Greek and Hebrew. I'm not that high a level of scholar, but I understand the issues of translation, and I can look up things in passages. But I said, let's start in Genesis. And so we read Genesis. And together, and we had like 4 or 5 meetings over a period of a month or so, and we read through Genesis. And he asked, we didn't raise him, my wife and I didn't raise him or my daughter in any particular faith. And so we're letting him make up his mind. And he had so many questions that didn't have the evangelical lens in front of it.
Right. He didn't have the baggage.
Exactly. Yeah. And he asked these great questions. And so we finished the study of Genesis, and I went, you know what? I have never read the Bible straight through. And so I have the old Revised Standard Version that was published in the 50s that has the textual notes in it, lots of commentary and textual notes. And I plugged away for about a year and a half, maybe 2 years, and read the whole thing straight through. And I went, you know what? I'm a firm believer. I'm reading this stuff, and all these essays, these ideas for essays popped into my head. So I created a formerbelieverreads.com. When I read something, either in the Bible or I read something, related to faith, or in the news that's related to religion, I develop an essay and post about it.
Yeah, it gives you a spot to really journal it. And, in a lot of ways, this particular podcast, it was similar. I also had a first podcast called the Rechoice podcast. That was a kind of a different, there was all kinds of topics there, but in a way, it was a way for me to wrestle with topics that were in my head, and I want to record it. I want to put it somewhere. And that's what it kind of reminds me of for that blog. Recently, Lee, we featured Molly and Zach from the Secular Education Association. Yeah. Which both you and I met them in Minneapolis. Yep.
I remember being kind of pissed off, if I can say pissed off, when you're about.
Absolutely can. Yeah.
About the attempt to take over public education in very small spots. And people, and I forgot that you'll remember this, but I forgot the name of that organization that is.
Yes, I can tell you. It's LifeWise.
LifeWise. I was going to say Life Force, but it's LifeWise. And talking to them made me, I went to my own area in Minnesota and I typed in, LifeWise schools in my area. And I found out that they're trying to, infest, if I can use that word, infest.
Absolutely, you can. It's like a virus, man.
Exactly. And and there's some in my area. So I told them, I said, when I'm thinking of retiring, I might run for school board, or I might at least have a voice in my area, because my school, where I teach, my school is not going to be. There's not a danger. I teach in one of the urban schools in Minneapolis, St. Paul. There's not a danger there, but out in the burbs where I live, you're getting closer to Trump country. And
hey, Lee, I did the same thing you did. When I got home, I went on the map. And on the map, in fact, I'll put it in the show notes, y'all. And in fact, if it's probably already on the other episode, but it shows you quite clearly just how, and I got to kind of like spell it out a little bit more for people who haven't heard that episode. This group, LifeWise, is trying to bring the Bible into public schools as character education, but they call it LifeWise. Yeah. It happens during the school day. Mm-hmm. They give candy out. They do all kinds of stuff. And it's really, it's absolutely against the Constitution. So when you say you were pissed off, I was fired up too, man. So you had an essay that even came before all of this, though. What did you say in that essay about teaching the Bible in public schools? Yeah, on my blog, aformerbelieverreads.com, I've got an essay titled Teaching the Bible in Public School. And the stance that I take is an ironic one. And I say, listen, I don't want the Constitution to be violated. If you are going to introduce ideas like posting the 10 Commandments in school, or requiring teachers to teach creationism or intelligent design or anything like that, I want to sign up first to teach it. Yeah. Because I'm going to teach it in a critical way. I'm going to ask some tough questions of the text, and I'm going to teach it like you teach a history text. And let's go cover to cover, just like you were doing. Yeah. And like some of some of the questions that I'm asking are, how can we compare the Judeo-Christian Bible with the Quran? That's interesting. Excellent. Because a lot of people that defend the Bible, if you gave them passages from the Quran to defend, they would say that's ridiculous. But I realized in studying theology and studying literature and history that it depends on where you're born. If you're born in a Muslim country, the chances that you'll be, studying the Quran and defending the Quran is much greater than if you're born in America. And so, in other questions, I would ask, is it possible that illiterate fishermen who never spoke Greek could even write complex gospels? And there are tons. So I list the, 10 or 12 questions. I see. So what they're really pushing, they want us to teach critical thinking, don't they? Yeah. So your kid. So, one of the things I think I end with is something, the kids are going to come around the dinner table and come back from school if I'm teaching them. And they're going to say things like, today we learned that it's very probable, according to the scholarship, that many of the sayings that Jesus, attributed to Jesus were written several hundred years after he lived, Right. How, they're going to be on the phone with their pastors going, how can we answer my kids' questions? I don't know what to do, Yeah, I'm sure there won't be any pushback to those kinds of questions too. I'm all on board. Yeah. I like the angle you went after that. Hey, can I ask you, who are some authors and content creators that you have found helpful as you think of topics to write about, or that even today, because I know the blog was started a few years ago or something like that, right? Yeah. But that you find pretty inspiring? Well, I appreciate the time that you're giving me here. Only before I got on the phone with you, I think I've told maybe 20 people about my blog, because I'm keeping my last name anonymous for now. Yes. But I'm hoping that more people go to it. Like, for example, I referenced several times Bart Ehrman, whom a lot of your listeners will know Bart Ehrman's work. He went to Wheaton College like I did about 8 or 10 years before I did. He was a Christian at the time. And then he went to seminary at, I believe it was Princeton.
And he became like an agnostic and then an atheist for some of the same reasons I did. And one of his chief reasons, and one of my chief reasons, is the problem of theodicy, or how we defend a perfect God when there's suffering in the world.
Mm-hmm.
And so Bart Ehrman, his podcasts, he's got a great podcast. He has a blog and he has YouTube channels that are great. And I would suggest that. And then I recently read a book. I actually reread a lot of the books that I study. But Jacob Wright, a guy named Jacob Wright, published Why the Bible Began. And
guess what? I have not heard of that one.
Well, I think it's a great book. Like I said, I'm rereading it. His thesis is that the Bible began because the Hebrews were defeated, and usually the winners write the history of their culture. But the Bible began because as the Jewish people were defeated, and you get this through the Old Testament, as they were defeated, they needed to create an identity that was not wrapped around a palace or a temple or a king.
Right.
Another, and I haven't blogged about this person yet, but I'm going to, is a woman named Robin Faith Walsh. And Robin Faith Walsh has recently, in the past 2 or 3 years, and again, I'm rereading her book here. I think it's called The Origins of Early Christianity. And she is offering a thesis that is really interesting on the origins of the especially the synoptic gospels, Matthew, Mark, and Luke. And the old view is that the Gospels arose from an oral tradition that were recorded by educated Greek writers a few decades after Jesus' death. And what Robin Faith Walsh says is that might be true, but we have more evidence of the Gospels being created as literary works of like fiction or biography that are in line with the Greek literary traditions at the time. So they're more of a product of literary writers trying to write books that are popular than people's voices that were authentic coming out of the Jesus traditions.
Yeah, they had their own incentives for making the stories the way they were. Is what it sounds like.
And a few other people that I list that are not theologians, but I have an essay about Frank Herbert's Dune, about politics and religion in Dune, because I read Dune when I was in high school, and then I reread it a year or two ago, and I was like, oh my gosh, there's so much here about religion and about Islam and Christianity and Salman Rushdie's satanic verses. I've got an essay about the satanic verses on my website, and my essays are pretty short. They're like 900 words.
Yeah, I noticed that too. Yeah, which is actually great because it's edible that way.
Yeah.
You know? Yeah. Hey, by the way, did you see the movie for Dune?
I saw the old one, the one with Sting in it.
I have not seen the old one.
Yeah, but I haven't seen. My son keeps telling me. My son just keeps.
Oh, it's good.
You got to watch them with Timothy Chalamet, right? Yeah.
Yeah, and I happened to see it in IMAX, so I mean, the sound was.
My God.
Anyway, yeah, you'll probably have to go see that. But yeah, I appreciate that. And another person that I guess I'm surprised I didn't know of, but that I learned of at the conference was genetically modified skeptic.
Yes,
right?
I've been listening to him for years. I met him. I like him and his wife. Yeah, they're great.
Tell the audience about. GMS is kind of how you abbreviate it, I guess. But just introduce them. Yeah, well, genetically modified skeptic, the guy's name is Drew, and he's a former Christian, and he was actually one of the first Christians, or former Christians, that introduced the word deconstruction to me as far as applies to the Christian faith or coming away from a religious tradition. My connection to the word deconstruction is through literary criticism, which is a whole nother discussion we could have. But his YouTube channel is very much supporting people that are questioning their faith and moving away, wanting to move away or deconstruct their faith. And he's also, I think he's a very kind person. He is sensitive because he can truly remember what it was like to be an evangelical. And he is sensitive to that while he's also critical of that as an atheist now. So I really appreciate his attitude and his content.
I think are great.
Yeah, he's very honest too, and
Yeah.
And of course, I related a lot to just hearing him as a creator of things, what it's like to be in that light as well.
Yeah.
Well, hey, I don't know if you hear it, but I hear some music. It's time for the skeptic of the show.
I think it's real important to question what you know. So before you leave this podcast, it's the skeptic of the show.
Bart Ehrman is an American Testament scholar focusing on textual criticism of the New Testament, the historical Jesus, and the origins and development of early Christianity. He grew up in an Episcopal household, then became an evangelical Christian, eventually earning his Ph.D. from Princeton Theological Seminary. He's written and edited 30 books, including 3 college textbooks. Today, he considers himself an agnostic atheist after reading the Bible so closely and struggling with the philosophical problems of evil and suffering. Artie, what's the quote?
The Bible is filled with discrepancies, many of them irreconcilable contradictions. Moses did not write the Pentateuch, the first 5 books of the Old Testament, and Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John did not write the Gospels. There are other books that did not make it into the Bible that at one time or another were considered canonical. Other Gospels, for example, allegedly written by Jesus' followers, Peter, Thomas, and Mary. The Exodus probably did not happen as described in the Old Testament. The conquest of the Promised Land is probably based on legend. The Gospels are at odds on numerous points and contain non-historical material. It is hard to know whether Moses ever existed and what exactly the historical Jesus taught. The historical narratives of the Old Testament are filled with legendary fabrications, and the book of Acts in the New Testament contains historically unreliable information about the life and teachings of Paul. Many of the books of the New Testament are pseudonymous, written not by the apostles but by later writers claiming to be apostles. The list goes on.
So you just heard that quote. Lee, would you say Bart is trying to deconvert people, as many would suggest?
Listen, I have briefly corresponded with Bart Ehrman. I have read a lot of his stuff. I've reread a lot of his stuff. I've listened to hours of him talk. He doesn't want anybody, like any of his students, he teaches at the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill, and he doesn't want his students leaving the faith. He knows, he constantly says that he knows so many scholars that have had the same education he's had, that went to Princeton Theological Seminary or Harvard or wherever, and they are still believers, but they're not literal believers. They're not uneducated believers. They're not believers who don't question. He doesn't want people to lose their faith. He just wants people to be honest about looking at texts, honest about looking at history. And as my teachers, as I alluded to earlier, my teachers said, God can deal with your toughest questions. He just wants people to ask tough questions and to not be ignorant. So I'm so appreciative of his work.
Well, and again, I called you Literacy Lee earlier because I can see you have a passion just for the written word, and you really, really look at it. Now, I've certainly been accused of being a minion for Satan.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
It's funny you say that. That title of our show is really just an attempt to look again at what people say and read. Like, hey, it's funny that a simple, honest question can be branded as speaking for the devil.
Yeah.
This really brings it to your point of what does it mean to wrestle with God anyway?
Yeah, I think of so many people who grow up in the faith, and even people who don't, have what I call the persistent God question in their lives, and that's one of the reasons I went to seminary. Is I wanted to ask the toughest questions I could until I felt like I either had some answers. I thought I could get the answers early, but there's no the. There's no definite article, the answer. I don't think. I mean, maybe there would be some qualifications to that, but I think your title of your podcast is Skeptical, Scott, and I think that healthy skepticism is just a great way to go through life. and it's very much tied in with humanism and what we've inherited from, the Enlightenment. You're skeptical in a way that doesn't write off other people, but you're skeptical in a way that asks good, solid questions, and you've got to be willing to say, I might be wrong.
Yeah. I mean, people love certainty, and I feel like when people are so confident, overconfident, that they're forfeiting the battle. Like they're saying, okay, it's done. And you know what Bart also says, this quote, there are few things more dangerous than inbred religious certainty. Right? So do you think that then bleeds into politics as well?
Yeah, I think, you and I talked a little bit about this earlier, but I wrote I'm trying to find it.
I know what you're talking about. Is it the Trump one?
Yeah.
Yeah, reading Trump, it's like second to the bottom. So it's like one of your first ones.
Yeah.
And I guess before we dig into that, I actually want to do just kind of a bigger question.
Okay.
Was 2015 and 16 kind of a critical year for you, just by chance?
Sure. I mean, it was politically, following the election, Trump's first term, and that I remember seeing before the election, and I think it was, and I hope I don't misspeak here, but I think it was Keith Ellison from Minnesota, who I met at the Atheist Conference.
Oh,
by the
he
way.
was fantastic.
He was
Attorney
great.
General. Yeah.
Yeah, but Keith Ellison, I believe it was him, and I might be wrong, but he was being interviewed a few months or a year before the election by, I think it was George Stephanopoulos and a few other people on TV. And he said, well, if Trump becomes president, blah, blah, blah. And everybody's laughing at him. They were like, oh, yeah, right. Rolling their eyes.
There's no way. Yeah. Yeah.
And we hit just a critical mass that we're still, critical mass of voters for reasons that no pollsters could really identify until after the fact. We hit a critical mass of them that put this guy in office. And so I guess, I rode along with the rest of the nation through that period of politics. But when I wrote the essay, it got me thinking about how if people listen to a leader without question, which goes back to our previous discussion about, can you listen skeptically to somebody? The core of Trump's followers do not listen to him skeptically.
The way I think you titled it is he has become sacred scripture.
Yeah.
Right. In terms of what he says. And so for those of us who do think skeptically, when we hear just the asinine, crazy talk that we can't believe, I guess that's why I was asking about 2015-16, because when people who have known me for a while, when they hear of my skeptical thoughts or even more that I walked away from Christianity, they assume it must have been that election. And actually, that was not the case.
No.
I was thinking skeptically right before that, but doesn't it have to require some real cognitive dissonance to sustain the things that come out of his mouth?
Yeah. Well, the analogy that I'm making in the essay, Reading Trump as Biblical Text, is that when you're an evangelical, or not just evangelical, but a conservative scholar or a conservative person, not a scholar, but a person attending church, and you are told and grew up believing that the Bible is 100% true, whatever that means, then anytime there's a contradiction, you have to, and scholars do this who are conservative scholars, you have to reconcile those contradictions in ways that do a whole lot of theological gymnastics to get through, hoops, right? And so when I realize when Trump, people who say, well, Trump never lies, or Trump told us this and it's got to be true. And I realize they have the same mindset that they take to the Bible. If their preacher tells them it's true, it's got to be true. And there's no questioning it. People read, I think his most dedicated followers, people read him as if he's a biblical text. He can say whatever and even contradict himself 2 paragraphs later or 2 days later, like you'll read contradictions in the biblical text, and they have to reconcile him.
And they will. They'll reconcile it for him. And
exactly.
I believe he knows that too.
Of course.
He can say whatever the hell he wants because he knows the listeners will do the followers, I should say, will reconcile it for him.
Correct. And if he gives it that much thought, but
True.
I read it every day in the news that there are people who are, he says up is down, and they explain deeply why up is down now.
Well, when you think about it, when the earth rotates, what was down is now up. They'll come up with something.
Yeah, exactly.
In fact, I've got an idea.
Yeah.
If you could go to the Reading Trump as Biblical Text, set it up for us, and we will get Artie's help on this as well. So it's towards the bottom.
So in my essay, I say, what if Jesus, if just briefly, came down from heaven and, say, spoke mildly about some off-color comment the president made? What if the Christian Lord said, for example, Mr. Trump might want to hold off on the casting of so many aggressive verbal stones at his enemies? He's not perfect, How would this hideous affront be reviewed by the always Trumpers? Here are a few educated guesses of the cognitive dissonance required for response.
What does a failed carpenter from Galilee know about perfection anyway? Asked the Reverend Franklin Graham, a prominent ally of the president. He's wounded himself, The televangelist and Trump supporter, Paula White, weighed in with, "You can see the rags he's wearing, the holes in the hands, the feet. Disgraceful. He ought to talk. This savior could use a dose of some good old prosperity gospel, if you ask me." Who does he think he is? God's gift to humanity or something? Jerry Falwell Jr., the president of Liberty University, offered in defense of his true leader. This Christ is very quick to throw aspersions himself while telling this wonderful president not to cast stones. The hypocrisy. Really. A prominent senator and Trump golfing buddy from South Carolina joined the chorus with, "Well, we all are not perfect, even the president sometimes. But when it comes to the leader of the free world, you keep your comments to yourself, if you're a good conservative."
Finally, the Donald himself tweeted at 3:16 a.m., "He's only a savior because he died. I prefer saviors who don't die." Disgusting.
Disgusting in all caps. Hey, nice choice on time there, 3:16 a.m. I see what you did there.
Well, he does that. I'm not lying.
Well done, man. And as you and I have learned, there are many skeptics out there, and we are really good at sharing our thoughts and connecting online. Have you been able to find some community out there?
I have this app on my phone that I discovered maybe 10 years ago called Meetup. And I don't know I'm sure other people have it on their phone.
Guess what? I just downloaded that.
Yeah. And so, again, like about 10 years ago, I put it on my phone and I typed in a few things I was interested in. And because of that, I get notifications about humanist groups and atheist groups and a few other Bible study groups and stuff. But I started going to the humanist groups and the atheist groups. I became a member, I want to say tithing member, but a contributor, a financial contributor. And a few times a month, I go to some meetings. And that's how I found out about the atheist convention. And so there's a community out there, at least in the Twin Cities area, of humanists and atheists. And these communities overlap, and they're really great people. And a lot of them know so much about the Bible because they read it seriously. They don't just take what everybody tells them, and I think that's great. And also one of the things that I'm just starting to do, and I'm thinking about doing it after I retire in a few years, is presenting to churches on an agnostic's view of reading the Bible. And I already presented to two churches in the Twin Cities area. They were Unitarian Universalist churches.
Oh, yeah. Good old UU.
Yeah. But I know that there's some other. So anyway, I know there are other churches that might be like Episcopal churches that more liberal minded that would be interested. But I'm taking some of my ideas about reading the Scripture and I'm presenting them to churches, and I'm hoping to do more of that moving forward. But we'll see where it goes.
So yeah, the point is here, listener, if you are, you've reached out to this podcast just to, I don't know, not feel alone and hear some other skeptics like ourselves.
Yeah.
Check out meetup.com. You'd be surprised at the amount of people who are meeting for example, maybe board games or sci-fi books or whatever. You're going to find other skeptics there, and a lot of them go by their first name.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and
cool.
also they do things like, adopt a highway or, give, have like a food drive. and they're doing things that Christians and Jews and deeply religious people would do. They're just doing it because they believe in the greater good of humanity and human thriving, and not because somebody told them to do it necessarily.
Well, good. Hey, Lee, as we wrap up here, is there anything else you'd like our listeners to know?
I guess I'd like to, something just popped into my head a couple minutes ago.
Yeah, go for it.
You're like the attitude that genetically modified skeptic has, the attitude that Bart Ehrman has, the attitude that you have. There are a lot of people out there who've been burned by the faith, have negative, and sometimes when I talk about the faith, I'll talk maybe in a way that sounds biting or very sarcastic. And I'm hoping that sometimes when we sound sarcastic about the faith, it's because we were in the family and we're criticizing our own family. And when somebody from the outside criticizes your mom or dad, it sucks. But when somebody like your brother or sister criticizes your mom or dad, you understand.
Yeah, that's
and
a great point. Yeah.
So I just hope that people who might be on the fence or who might be more conservative minded, they tune in, they hear a few negative comments. I hope that they listen to the whole spirit of the discussion and the conversation, because I hate to say it, but there are a lot of atheists out there who are so negative they're not worth listening to, in my opinion. But the ones, I'd say, if you're looking for a community, if you're on the fence, you think you might want to leave a church, which I know that's high stakes. That's so high stakes for a lot of people, that you listen to people who uplift you and who are intelligent but yet wise. That's what I'm looking for, is people who have serious criticisms but yet are still willing to listen to other people.
Oh, I love that. That's a great final thought. And check our show notes for more of Lee's blog, A Former Believer Reads. Lee, thank you. Thank you for joining us on Funny You Say That.
Thank you so much, Skeptical Scott. I appreciate your time and your spirit as well. Thank you so much.
Thanks for listening to Funny You Say That with Skeptical Scott and friends. Find all of our episodes and social media channels at skepticalscott.com.
Have a question? Interested in being a guest on our show, or you just want to share a part of your questimony? Email us at heyskepticalscott@gmail.com.
Drop the supernatural, embrace the rational, believe in as many true things as possible.
Otherwise, you may end up believing in something that is even more artificial than me.
See you every first and third Friday. May skeptical thoughts be with you.
And also with you.
Cheers.